The morning sun cast long shadows across the Makulu Wildlife Preserve. Mark Hutchkin's boots crunched on the dry earth as he stepped from the dusty Land Rover, a sound that had become the background music to his 15 years as a wildlife conservationist. Today was different, however. Today, he thought, his heart pounding against his ribs as he neared the enclosure gate. Sarah Kenton followed, concern etched on her features. "Are you sure about this, Mark?" she asked. 5 years is a long time. He's a fully mature male lion now, not the cub you rehabilitated. Mark nodded, his throat too tight for words. The memories of nursing the orphaned cub back to health were vivid, despite the passing years. Named Quasi for the morning star, the cub had been barely clinging to life after poachers killed his mother. Mark had slept beside his cage for weeks, feeding him by hand, cleaning his wounds, rebuilding his trust. "He might not even remember you," Sarah continued, checking the tranquilizer gun at her hip, a precaution she insisted on. "He'll remember," Mark finally said, his voice rough. Quasi had been relocated to this preserve 5 years prior, when he grew too large to remain at the rehabilitation center. It was the right decision, but leaving him had been one of the hardest moments of Mark's career. Now, after years working across the continent, the pull to see Quasi again was irresistible. Sarah radioed the preserve staff as they reached the observation area. "We're in position. Is the subject visible?" A crackled response confirmed, affirmative. "He's resting under the acacia, about 50 meters out. Appears calm." Mark raised his binoculars, and his breath caught. There in the dappled shade lay a magnificent lion with a full, dark mane. Quasi had grown into his name, a star among lions, massive and regal. Mark's hands trembled slightly as he lowered the binoculars. "I need to go in," he said quietly. Sarah grabbed his arm. "That's not the plan. We agreed on observation only." "I need to know if he remembers me, Sarah," Mark insisted. "I can't explain it, but I need to know." Their eyes locked in a silent battle before Sarah's shoulders slumped. "The safety protocols are non-negotiable. Tranquilizer team on standby. You stay behind the secondary fence, and at the first sign of aggression, you get out. Understood?" Mark nodded, already moving toward the secure entry. His heart hammered as the head ranger, a stern-faced man named Jabari, briefed him, clearly thinking this was a terrible idea. Mark barely heard the instructions, his focus entirely on the golden figure in the distance. When the inner gate opened, Mark stepped into the buffer zone, a narrow corridor protected by a secondary fence. The scent of the savannah filled his senses, sun-baked earth, dry grass, the distant musk of animals. "Quasi," he called softly. In the distance, the lion's ears twitched. His massive head lifted, nose testing the air. Mark called again, slightly louder. "Quasi." "It's me, boy." The lion rose in one fluid motion, power embodied in muscle and sinew. Even from this distance, Mark could see his impressive size, at least 400 pounds of apex predator. Quasi turned toward the sound, golden eyes scanning until they locked onto Mark. Time seemed to stand still. Behind him, Mark heard the preserve staff tense, the metallic sound of the tranquilizer gun being readied. But he couldn't look away from those eyes he had once wiped clean of infection, eyes that had watched him trustingly during treatments. Quasi began to walk toward him, unhurried but purposeful. Mark held his ground, though every instinct screamed to retreat. The lion's gait was smooth, powerful shoulders rolling with each step. "Mark," Sarah hissed. "He's coming too close." "It's okay," Mark whispered, never breaking eye contact. "He's just curious." Quasi stopped about 10 feet from the inner fence, close enough for Mark to see his individual whiskers, the patterns in his iris, the small scar above his right eye, a remnant from his injuries as a cub. The lion's nostrils flared as he scented the air. "Hey, buddy," Mark said softly, his voice breaking. "Remember me?" The lion tilted his head, studying him. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Quasi made a soft chuffing sound, a non-threatening greeting lions use among themselves and with humans they trust. A sound Mark had taught him as a cub. My God, Sarah breathed. He remembers. Mark slowly crouched to the lion's eye level, tears blurring his vision. Quasi approached the fence, his massive paw reaching out to touch the barrier. Mark did the same, placing his hand against the fence opposite the lion's paw. I missed you, too, old friend, he whispered. For several minutes they remained this way, man and lion, separated by metal and years, yet connected by something that defied explanation. The preserve staff watched in stunned silence as Quasi began to rub his mane against the fence where Mark's scent was strongest, a behavior typically reserved for members of his pride. I've never seen anything like this, Jabari said quietly. In 20 years of wildlife management, I've never. He trailed off as Quasi lay down beside the fence, as close to Mark as possible, and closed his eyes in a gesture of complete trust. Mark sat down as well, overwhelmed. I told you he'd remember, he said to Sarah, who watched with tears in her own eyes. None of them could have predicted what would happen next.